So this is Jack, obviously.
Hi.
Jack, meet all the founders. We've got a bunch of folks here who are founders from 500 startups, various different batches, many of whom are pretty early on in their journey in building out their idea and getting it to market. So really excited to let them learn from you. I know you know a little bit about being a founder. So I was hoping to just kind of kick off with one question about that kind of founder experience, and then we'll throw it out to the room pretty quick so folks can ask you whenever they want and not what I want. Cool, so there are hundreds of things, obviously, that keep founders up at night. I'm curious, what's the most overlooked thing that you think founders should be thinking about, especially in the early stages?
Sleep.
Do you want to expand on that?
I've been through the whole thing about, I was a hacker when I was a kid, so the Mountain Dew, the staying up all night, the not sleeping, and thinking the only way to prove myself was the fact that I could sleep the least. And it's been so eye-opening how much I was wrong about that, and how I, instead of focusing on the number of hours I'm up, focusing on what I'm actually focused on and why for the hours that I am working, has been so much more impactful than trying to maximize everything. I mean, there are certainly times when you have to go all out and reach deadlines, but I just don't think health is valued enough by people who are starting something, and it does wear on you eventually.
What are some of the ways, just kind of following up, what are some of the ways that you actually bring focus to those things that are most critical?
Sorry, what?
Just how do you tactically, it's one thing to say oh yeah, focus in the hours I am awake on the most important things. What are the ways that you bring that attention?
Just have a really good sense of, I only have so much time on the planet. I only have so many hours in the day. Is this really the most important thing I could be doing right now? And if I were to look back 10 years, would I be proud of the hour I'm spending right now? And that's kind of heavy. You don't have to do that all the time, but and somewhat unrealistic. But holding that bar for what you're working on in the moment, I think is important. That's
cool. So fair warning, I'm going to open it up to the room in just a moment. We actually had someone submit a question ahead of time, so I do want to read that and just get this person's question out there. So this is from one of the founders in the room. This person says, like Square, we're also focused on small business customers, in retail in particular. Speaking to an investor, what would you say is the reason why you chose small businesses as your target market, and how has that benefited the growth of your business?
Speaking to an investor, it wasn't I'll say it wasn't really about a category we're going after small businesses. Instead we talked about the problem that we were seeing, which was more and more people are choosing the convenience of a plastic card versus paper money, and a lot of the businesses today don't accept them. And we dug into that, and we realized that businesses were getting their FICO score checked or their credit checked to accept money, which made no sense whatsoever. And we dug into that, and that's the technology the banks had at the time. So we more painted a picture of the problem that was emergent, and then we realized it wasn't about accepting the credit card. It was actually these people are losing sales because they can't accept this payment device. So it became a problem statement that we're going to help these sellers make the sale in the first place, and then potentially, as we figure things out, help them make more sales as well. So I think it's hard to go after a category of people and focus on the persona instead of the problem statement and the job that you're trying to solve. And I think you'll get a lot more insight by focusing on the job. And again, just to paint a picture, our first merchant was a flower cart, and just because she was underneath my apartment, and we noticed that she would not accept credit cards. She just wanted to keep it simple and cash. And it wasn't until we were with her and someone came up and tried to pay with a credit card, and then she told him to go to an ATM and he never came back, that she was open to it. And it was in that moment that we realized she doesn't need a credit card reader. She needs to make the sale. And that one insight, like we could have gone down a path of building a credit card reader, charging for the software, charging for the reader, and we'd end up being like Verifone, which produces all these big black terminals, which is not a very valuable company. I don't even know if they're around much anymore. But instead we went into this insight of like, actually what she's trying to do is make the sale, and there's a credit card machine is just one way to make the sale. There's also point of sale, which helps organize the business, so they organize the information around the business so they can make more informed decisions. Capital, lending helps them make a sale. So with that one insight, we were able to really expand the value, the potential value of the company, because we weren't focused on one tiny thing. We were focused on a bigger job, which is help me make a sale and then help me make more sales. That did not focus on technology, that didn't focus on a category. It could have been someone who was micro, like our first merchant, or a small, or a medium, or large. That to me is like where the true value is created, is when you're not boxed in by these categories.
Awesome. All right, who's the first brave soul to ask a question? Just raise your hand.
Hi, Jack. I have a business-related question and maybe a follow-up question too. Well, like in the past 10 years, there's a lot of brick-and-mortar retailers or like food and beverage stores, for example, Starbucks. They're struggling with one particular problem, that they're trying to figure out whether some people go into the store for a free bathroom ends up buying a coffee or not. So like, I understand Square have this kind of real-time data of the payment events, but so you guys know that whether the sale is slow or not, but not necessarily knowing that like what's the reason behind it, whether it's because of the layout of the stores or whether it's just too many people go there for free bathroom. So is this something under Square's radar that you guys want to solve?
No, not yet. Yeah, not yet. We've kind of built the business just focusing on like what is the most critical need right now, and then the next most critical need, next most critical need, next most critical need. And we started with the smaller merchants who probably have this problem, but it's in comparison with the other problems they have of just getting people in the door. It's just not meaningful to solve. So eventually, over time, I'm sure analyzing foot traffic and how to gain insight from that would be useful, but at the moment, not so much.
Thanks, Jack.
Thank you for the question.
Hi, Jack. I'm Sarup. My company is building a developer platform in the blockchain space. So my question to you is, do you see integrating the blockchain as a technology in Square for whether it's orders, payments, apart from just accepting crypto as a payment solution?
Well, the blockchain is a ledger, and our business is around having a credible ledger. So we're actually using the blockchain internally right now, and I'm sure it has other applications internally. I don't know much. I don't want to just like, oh, blockchain's great, let's apply it everywhere. Again, it starts with the problem, and is this a unique and efficient solve for that problem? And then we're going to be doing a ton with Bitcoin and crypto generally, but we are using it today because it fit perfectly, because it actually solved one of our biggest operational challenges, which is a ledger in real time.
Yeah. So this is like deja vu, because I asked the question in Lagos when you were in Lagos. So staying in
Vegas.
Awesome. Nice seeing you
We
again.
flew him in just for that.
Yeah, so I asked this question and you said it wasn't the right, you were talking about another company, but we should talk about Square now. So I'm going to ask it again. First, is Square
Talk
coming
about
to-
any company when it doesn't.
is Square coming to Africa? Because the solution that you actually give solves a lot of problems. So I work with a company that I'm one of the 500 batch companies. What we do is we use rewards and incentives to help merchants analyze their sales, inventory, and stuff like that. And using these rewards, customers are excited to actually visit merchant locations. So we use it for majorly analytics. But getting that data, we had to do a lot of integrations. So we had to get into banks, we had to get into POS machines, payment terminals, this, that, when one integration could have solved all that problem if we had it like a Square. So the question is Square coming to Africa? Oh, that's the first question.
What's your second question?
So the second question is, so we're also looking at the American market, and we see that what we do is a bit unique. We've not really seen that a lot here, because most of the rewards and incentives that come from either credit card companies or coupons or vouchers. So we want to see how we can partner with Square to be able to give decentralized rewards, some like a Square Cash, that can be given to true merchants, and merchants can give those rewards to customers, and you can spend it at any other Square location, and earn rewards with that data. You can share customers, not just merchants. So it's Square open to a partnership with a company coming from somewhere else. Well, we're now an American company, so would you be willing to do a partnership with us here?
Well, so for the first question, I'm coming to Africa. So
Yes.
I'll be there for 4 months, probably starting in May, which I'm really excited about. Probably 4 or 5 countries, including Nigeria.
Definitely.
And my goal in my time spent there is number one, we're trying to decentralize the company a lot more. So we're way too tied up in the San Francisco clock, and it's not serving us well anymore. So I want to go and basically do what I do here, but in a completely different time zone and location. So we need to figure this out where it doesn't impact our execution to the negative. So that's goal number one, is like just walk the talk around remote and be elsewhere. And that it doesn't impact and doesn't require people to travel to see me to continue to run the company. That's number one. Number two is to learn where we should partner. And I do believe that as Square does enter the continent, it should be a partnership strategy, not a replacement strategy, which is what we've done with all the other places that we've come in, where we're seeking to replace the competitor on the ground. I think for a lot of the entrepreneurs I met in Africa, I think it requires a different approach, and I think it's a partnership approach. So if we can structure a partnership on the continent, certainly it goes 2 ways, and it happens on this continent too. So yes, we have to talk about your company, but yes, the mindset is open enough that we want to do that. It's just a question of when. And then third goal for me is to help entrepreneurs in these various countries with sharing any of my experiences about how we built. Ethiopia was very eye-opening to me because they have all these crazy requirements in order to start a business. Like, you must be profitable, which this company is still not profitable, by the way. Square, Twitter just turned it. And you must have a physical office. And you must have, and this is their words, a secretary as well. So it's just completely backwards and old. And one of the things that Ethiopian entrepreneurs asked me is like, I didn't meet with any of the government when I was there in November. Next time, can you come and just share your experience with our prime minister about we could not start these companies by being profitable. It's just over. We didn't have. I worked out of my apartment, and we didn't have an office, and that's how it had to begin. So you got to remove some of these constraints. So, so those are my 3 goals. But yes, 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 and yes.
Thank you very much.
Well, people are getting brave again. I'm curious, like, if there were anything from your first trip to Africa or anything you're going back to learn more about that was more on the innovative side that you thought we could bring back to the U.S.
Well, I think here, especially here in San Francisco and Silicon Valley, like a lot of our innovation comes from desire. And the stark contrast in the countries within Africa is it's all out of necessity. And that creates an incredible focus and passion. And it feels like, I mean, a lot of the entrepreneurs I met were focused on payments because I met one entrepreneur who started the Lyft/Uber of Ethiopia, and she can't, like, the biggest issue she has is like people can't move money, like they can't pay her, and they have to do all these things just to get the money to the drivers and to the company and whatnot. So there's just like some foundational stuff that a lot of these companies are looking at, and they're not just looking at like, let's replicate what's elsewhere in the world, but like, let's jump. So there's a huge appreciation for crypto and like what that can mean, especially, and then that gets into the other thing, which you see a lot of government control and corruption through the currencies. You have the foreign exchange issue. So that was a huge bucket of innovation, and then the next biggest one felt like health, and the next biggest one felt like sustainability. And what was awesome is like, again, they're not like replicating, they're jumping, and it's like super focused, a lot of necessity. And to me, like the best invention comes out of necessity. Like that's how this company started. My co-founder, this may not feel like necessity, but he was a glass artist and he couldn't sell a piece of glass art. And for a lot of artists like him, that's like the decision between doing what you love versus doing what you have to just to eat. So that need, that problem was important. And with Twitter, it was funny because like it definitely did not come out of necessity. No one needed Twitter. And people would tell us that all the time. We're solving a problem nobody has, literally nobody has. But then all these people would show us why they needed it. And that was a special thing about the company is like we saw all these activists show us why it's important. And we saw like how people were protesting government show us why it's important. And then all these use cases emerged. We didn't know why it was important. And it was nice to not have to dictate that, but to be shown why it was critical and why it was important. So it's various paths to figuring out this.
Hey, Jack. From any of your companies, what would you say has been your biggest setback or failure? And in hindsight, what was the learning coming out of that?
I always hope for bigger setbacks and failures because I want to, like, this is the only way I learn. But I think the earliest one is just not valuing enough the team dynamic that we're trying to create. We had an individual early in Twitter who was brilliant and by all measure, probably the only one that could keep the service up and bring it back if it ever went down, which it went down like every single day. And but this person was like toxic and just really hard to work with and was bringing the team down. So it took me 6 months to finally build up the courage to part ways with this person. And the courage was lacking because I didn't know if we could get the site back up if this person left. So what happened is finally did it, and it was a pretty emotional moment. The person was crying, I was crying, and then I told the company, the whole company was crying, and we're like crying because we're sad, like this is the first time someone's leaving the company, but also like, oh shit. And what happened is the site went down, and 3 people kind of rose to the occasion and brought it back up, and within like an hour or 2. And suddenly we went from being a single point of failure on one person and being entirely dependent on one person to having 3 people being able to have more knowledge about how to bring this up. So that like I think the number one part of my job is team dynamic. It starts with my team, but it extends the whole company, and that means how we work together, whether we're contrasting in a positive way, whether we're making ourselves more creative through the conversation and the work. So a lot of it follows from that. But that was probably the biggest thing that I learned from.
Hi, I'm Jeremy. I actually wrote the first question that I submitted online. I'm kind of surprised nobody else actually used the form. But I wanted to ask a follow-up to that. So we sell to small businesses, and that's a category, right? And I'm curious whether maybe there's a difference in how the fundraising market has changed in 15 years or so. But I've been in the situation a number of times where if I give a story about how I can help a flower person sell more goods or a glass maker sell more goods, the investors immediately crank it through the numbers. They're like, okay, lifetime value, how many of them are there? How fast can you acquire them? And like, is this a good business for me to invest in? And that can be a difficult, especially if they're a pretty hard driving numbers type of person, it can be a hard thing to navigate. So I was wondering if you could speak more to that. It seems like there's a big part of telling the story of who the people are and what the problem is. But yeah, what do you do when it becomes like you're being boxed into something and you have to bring it back out to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. The most important thing to me is we actually have something to show. We're not just telling a story. So with Twitter, we only went to outside, and Twitter's very unique as well because like we came out of this other company that was failing, so we had money from my co-founder Ev, who funded Odeo, and then we went out for our Series A, but we only went out with real usage. I wanted to be able to tell the story of the people using it, how they were using it, and that's critical. And we only went to investors with this company when we had a few merchants, and we only had 7, and it was completely against Visa's rules for us to be doing what we had to lie on our merchant application and hide it for like a year. So we took a lot of risk early on to get to the usage we needed, but then I wanted to go in with not only usage but a working prototype, and Square was like an incredible company to pitch because I would just go up to these investors and I would say, "You want to see our thing?" They would say, "Yeah," and they would hand over your credit card and they would say, "Why?" Like, "I want to show you the thing," and they're like, "No." I'm like, "Well, we're gonna leave." And they're like, no, here. And then I would take like $5 or 50, or if they hand me a black card, I would take 500 because why not? They're not gonna miss it. And we would have a good dinner then. And like that, it being that tangible, just immediately got their imagination working. Like they would say, "My dog walker could use this. My babysitter could use this. Like, there's a coffee store I go to that doesn't accept credit cards. It's so frustrating." So as soon as they start like completing the story, then we have a captive audience to tell our own sense of like how we're going to build a business of mass. And the numbers certainly come into it and they want to see all these models, but they're all bullshit in the end. I mean, you have to just make it work, right? So all we can do is show why we are best to make it work. And that was the other thing that I was up against is like a lot of investors, we did something that I thought was clever. One, we had 2 weeks, this for Square, we had 2 weeks of meeting investors. And in the first week, we put all the people we didn't want to work with. So we pitched all the firms and the people we did not want to work with. And the last week, we pitched all the ones we did. So in that first week, we got all the questions and the pushback and and made all of our mistakes. And then by the final 2, I really wanted to work with Sequoia, Ruloff, who was the CFO at PayPal, or Vinod Khosla, just because of what he's brought in his insight and his contrast. So Kosa was at the very end. And so when we reached them, we were very well rehearsed and practiced and whatnot, and we saw all the questions. And then the second thing we did is we had a slide in the deck of like 140 reasons why this company will fail. And we just went out and we took 10 of them and we went line by line as to how we would address those potential failures. And that gave people a lot of confidence. Again, we only had 7 merchants when we showed it off, but we had a working prototype, we had people using it, and we had enough of a story to tell that was believable that they took a chance. And then once they took that chance, then it was easier to get the other funding down the line. But I think it's just a question of like, how can you make people feel what you're trying to build, make it as tangible as possible, and then get them to finish your sentence has been the thing that's always worked for me.
Hi, Jack. I'm Benjamin from IoTech. We apply AI and data to solve problems in healthcare. So thanks for sharing earlier on. And you observe a problem in payment, and then you guys did a great job to solve that. But you also mentioned that you observe like health problems as well around the world. So if you had the opportunity to use your experience to solve healthcare problems, how would you start?
I don't know. I do, if I were to start another company, it would definitely be in health space, and it would probably be mental health, just because I'm fascinated by the mind and how we just don't understand it. So I guide myself more by what I'm curious about. And I imagine that I would find a bunch of interesting problems there and build from that. But I'm from Missouri. My state, my community has been, and just the health epidemic there is crazy. And you look at the incentives that push that. I mean, there's no focus on preventative at all. There's no focus on eating healthy. There's no focus on moving. So it incentivizes really, really unhealthy behavior and lifestyles. So I'd probably go home again and like ask the question why and what can we do? What can we do about it?
Yeah, thanks so much.
I think I probably have time for one more question.
Hey, Jack. Hey, Jack. I wanted to know about Square's plans in emerging markets. I come from South America, and bancarization is a huge problem there. And also think about what's going on, for instance, with M-Pesa in Africa, or even in China, where the playbook is not including banks, or is not even including credit cards. And yet, those are the markets that probably need a better way of paying the most. So what are your plans on that?
Well, there's the short-term plans and then the longer-term plans. The short-term plans is we, as a company, cannot act like an internet company. An internet company can launch something and publish a website or publish an app, and the whole world can use it. We have to go market by market, have a relationship with a bank, have a relationship with the regulators, change our entire flow for all these different markets. It took us like 9 months to open in this country, even though we had all the technology built. It took us almost a year and a half to open in Japan, because we were the first time you could actually accept credit cards without doing an in-person government visit. Australia took 2 years because we found out that the banks also make point-of-sale systems and they didn't want us in the market, so they pushed the regulators to keep us out. So like, it's just a mess. So on the short term, we have to conserve our resources and go market by market by market by market, and do all these trade-offs around like what is the benefit. And the only rubric we used is what are the biggest economies in the world, and just go down the list. So we started with U.S., skipped China, went to Japan, went to Australia, and tried to get, we thought we were smart by trying to get in the EU through England, and then that whole we're in England now, but now we have to go back to the EU and go through Paris or France or Spain. So that, for a payments company, it kind of sucks, because it's just like it's a crazy slow process. something like Bitcoin changes this completely. Because if the world has one currency, you don't have to go market by market by market. You can actually launch something and the whole world could potentially use the same thing. So for the long term, that's why we're pushing so much on Bitcoin and crypto. Is like we need to see this as a currency. We need to see this as a global currency because it solves a bunch of our needs. It's also what the internet wants. I don't like who. It kind of sucks in comparison to what we are able to do at Twitter, where we just launch and the whole world can use, and it's our discretion whether we hold back any particular markets. Like we want to do a small test in Brazil versus launch it entirely, throughout the world from day one. So, yeah, we would love to move faster for all these countries around the world, but like payments sucks right now, but it's getting better and better every day.
On that note, thank you so much for lending some of your time and energy
Thank
to
you so
this
much.
group. Really
Thank you
appreciate
all.
it.
Thank you.